to begin her speech. Proceed after QP.
I'm going to split my time with the honourable member from Red Deer Mountain View. And it's hard to think of a more appropriate debate to expose the consequences of what transpired between the government and the NDP this morning. And while today it might seem politically expedient in the moment, Canadians lost out, I think, on having a voice in the NDP who once played a critical role in championing issues like this, issues of affordability. I'm actually rather surprised at some of those members, and I'll be even more surprised at their silence as time goes on. And while the fallout from broken trust with their constituents, coupled with a fire sale of their principles, in exchange for what amounts to broken promises from the government year after year, it's far more important that Canadians understand the consequences of a bad deal, not only for the two political parties in this House, but a bad deal for them.
Well stated.
Mr. Speaker, to simplify this transaction, the NDP members of this House have agreed to never hold this government to account. And in turn, the government has agreed to never control spending. Higher spending, higher taxes. And while I believe this to be a disingenuous attempt at politicians to protect themselves, I'm far more concerned with the devastating impact this deal may have. Higher spending, higher taxes, higher prices. But
interrupt the honourable member again. The noise in the antechambers is really, really bothersome. I can barely hear the honourable member's speech. Can people please quiet down? We are trying to have proceedings in the House. The honourable member, please.
But, Madam Speaker, today we have an opportunity to answer the call of Canadians from coast to coast, one that if you even spent a moment outside of this place talking to anyone, just about anywhere, you'd be hard-pressed not to hear the loud and clear call that skyrocketing inflation and the cost of living crisis is devastating families across Canada. The inflation rate is at the highest point in 30 years. That's 5.7. And it's growing faster than Canadian wages. And for the average Canadian, that's equivalent to a pay cut. 5 cents for every loonie earned. You'll hear in this House today the government's greatest hits, featuring a litany of excuses stating that the inflation rate is a result of global supply chains being disrupted by COVID, leading to higher prices. You'll hear the one-hit wonders of listing off countries and their corresponding inflation rates, or my very favorite, somehow asking the government to acknowledge a cost of living crisis. Members of this House hear from their constituents is an attack on the Canadian economy, and that we should be thankful and everything is absolutely fine. But what you will not hear is that the prices for Canadian products that are rising, it's those prices that are rising the most and the fastest. That's the inconvenient truth of the matter. You see, when you speak to people at the grocery store, or you bump into someone at the gas.
Debate. The honourable member for Thornhill.
I'm going to start where I left off. You see, when I speak to people in line at the grocery store or bump into someone at the gas station, it would be difficult and, quite frankly, embarrassing to list off the inflation rate in Denmark, or to tell them everything is okay and that we should not upset the government or take down the Canadian economy. Because when you tell people that the global supply chain is the reason that home heating is up 26%, their reaction is rightfully perplexed. We have 1.3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in Canada. That domestic energy supply provides heating for Canadian families. It has nothing to do with the global supply chain. Because when you tell someone that the global supply chain are the reason that a family pays an extra $1,000 a year for groceries, their reaction is rightfully confused. The country ranks third in the world for the amount of farmland per capita. We have the capacity to produce our own food, and it has nothing to do with the global supply chain. Because when you tell someone that global supply chains are the reason that gas prices have gone up in some places 50%, their reaction is, well, stunned. We do have that right here in Canada, Madam Speaker. We have the second largest oil and gas reserve in the world. And in the case, it's a question of why are we relying on the global supply chain? And when you tell someone everything is okay, when 4/5 of Canadian families are already cutting back and scratching their budgets, their reaction is one of fear. Fear that they will not be able to keep up. Fear that they will not be able to afford to live in their own communities. We have an opportunity here to stop saying that everything is okay, because it's not.
Really sorry, I apologize. Could the honourable members who'd like to have conversations go out into the lobbies, please? Si vous souhaitez parler à deux...
If you would like to talk to your colleagues, please go to the lobbies. We'd quite like to hear the speech from the member for Thornhill.
Thornhill.
We have an opportunity to actually do something, Madam Speaker, something that goes beyond the blind ideology of demonizing the oil and gas industry. We know how we got here. This is a direct result of printing money we don't have for things that we don't need. The government's unprecedented spending is out of control. You don't have to take my word for it. Scotiabank agrees. High levels of spending are seen as contributing to the strain on affordability pressures for Canadians. Their words, not mine, Madam Speaker. And to make matters worse, the government hasn't stopped spending or even slowed it. And I can already hear members of the government saying, but debt to GDP ratio. To that I say, let me invite you out on an afternoon in my own riding, and you can explain to Mrs. Cooper that the increased cost of buying healthy food for a family of 5 is fine because our debt to GDP ratio is amongst the best in the G7. Members of the government will say, oh, but the AAA credit score. Well, let me invite you that same afternoon, and you can explain to Mr. and Mrs. Green, who live on a fixed income and drive to see their grandkids, that they'll need an extra $50 a week for gas. When it comes to filling up these tanks, whether it's for Mr. or Mrs. Green to see their grandkids, or to those who need to get to work or take their kids to activities or just get around, the price is outrageous. We have witnessed over the last 6 years that this government's green energy policies contribute to seeing Canada's oil and gas sector destroyed. We do not have the infrastructure. We cannot get pipeline built. And despite the fact that we know that getting resources to Tidewater is vital to our economy and to our environmental goals and to our own security, no less, the crusade against our own interests continues, blindly supported by pipe dreams instead of pipelines. And while international conflicts in Ukraine have continued to contribute to those increases, they do not singularly explain the rise of price of gasoline, not even close. It's not the invasion in Ukraine that will add 11 cents on April 1st. It's not the invasion in Ukraine that neglected to build pipelines. It's not the invasion of Ukraine that has led to the lack of infrastructure, of investment, of development in our sector. It is, however, the direct result of the newly minted NDP-Liberal government, whose policies have put Canada in positions where Canadians are Instagram posting outrage pictures of the price to fill up their tanks. Our policies have consequences, and those consequences are hitting Canadian families directly. The good news is we can do something significant today. We can provide immediate relief to families providing a GST holiday on gasoline and diesel. Yes. We could immediately provide relief at the pumps to all Canadians, reducing prices by about 5%. That's 8 cents per litre. That's real savings, Madam Speaker. We can be fighting for families across Canada, and who have been pushed to the brink of the cost of living crisis. We can be fighting to leave money where it belongs, in the pockets of hard-working Canadians. We can do that if members of this House support this measure, if they support this motion. Record-high gas prices don't appear to be going away anytime soon. $1.24 a litre in March 2021 is $1.75 in my riding today. It's just a year later. Mr. Speaker, I live in a community where, like so many others, it's nearly impossible to get around without a car. Impossible to get to work on a bicycle. Impossible to take the kids to hockey practice on a skateboard. Impossible to get groceries on roller skates. The government's solution of reducing carbon emissions cannot be one that ignores the realities of real life of so many Canadians. More Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. Young people are giving up on home ownership, and nearly half of Canadians are worried about their financial security this year. A high-tax, high-debt agenda set the stage for inflation. It set the stage for pushing for punishing prices at the pumps. And today we have the opportunity to finally give Canadians the relief they need. Mr. Speaker, we are calling on this government to pause the GST on fuel and give Canadians a break. I'll ask members of this House to do the right thing by their constituents and support the motion in this House. We simply just can't afford not to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, earlier in the member's comments, she was talking about the price of the litre of gasoline and somewhat implied, you know, that because we have things here in Canada, that it should be a lot less expensive. And one of the ways in which some countries have been able to accomplish that is through the nationalization of a commodity. And right away, I started thinking, well, that doesn't sound like a conservative government or a conservative party's approach to dealing with issues, to nationalize and purchase ESSO and so forth. And I'm wondering if we're starting to see a shift in some of the mentality coming from the Conservative Party in dealing with price controls by saying that the Conservatives are interested in nationalizing in order to be able to keep down prices.
Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, it's been just a few hours and the member opposite is already starting to sound like he's part of the NDP. We print money here. We don't, instead of actually making things that money buy. Our rate of inflation is at a record high. Canadians can't afford gas, groceries, their everyday necessities. And instead of doing the right thing, instead of lowering or taking the GST off of us, an actual measure that can reduce the price at the pumps, he can do that immediately. Instead of doing that, he's just not.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. In reaction to the speech from my colleague, I wonder if her answer to increasing gas prices is a bit too simplistic. When we examine the price of the crude barrel as compared to the price at the pump, it's almost $2 a litre. And when we see the value of GST, it's around about 5%. So about 10 cents out of $2. So with 10 fewer cents, will that truly change the reality of the market? Should we not rather have a better long-term target to better manage the ups and downs of gas by, for example, electrifying transport? That would be a true long-term solution. So we'd be less dependent on oil and such products that can increase and decrease drastically based on the situation in Ukraine, for example, in the past because of what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. Sometimes it goes up for Christmas, goes down for summer break. It's a yo-yo, and it's consumers that hurt.
Thank you for the question. Thanks to my honourable colleague. Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity to do something immediate for Canadians to get some relief in a cost of living crisis. And I know the member, who asked the question hears that in his constituency. I know that he gets the same kinds of emails and calls that I get because this is a problem across the country. So instead, instead of doing the right thing today, he's suggesting that we put that aside and we focus on bigger issues. He has the opportunity to lower costs for Canadians today, and he's not taking that opportunity, and he's going to have to explain that to his constituents.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I very much agree with my honourable colleague that Canadians are experiencing a dramatic hardship due to the high cost of living, whether that's for food, for housing, for services, or as this motion speaks to, for gas at the pumps. We know as she said, we're facing record high gas prices. The problem that I see with this motion is that this motion does nothing about the excessive profits being made by oil and gas companies. We know that companies like Suncor just made a net profit of $4.1 billion. I mean, someone is profiting enormously from prices of gas at $2 per gallon. So my question to her is, instead of of doing this, would she agree that we should impose a tax of 3% on profits over $1 billion, as the NDP has suggested, and redirect that revenue to everyday Canadians?
The honourable member for Thornhill.
I appreciate the question from the member who actually still does sound like he comes from the NDP party. So there's that. Look, we have an opportunity right now to do something for Canadians. We've got an opportunity to lower the costs. I think the conversation about record profits in oil companies is a frivolous one in the context of this debate. He used to be part of a party that fought for the affordability of Canadians. Where is that member now?
Resuming debate, the honourable member.